Hi, everybody. Welcome to Virtual MoCA. My name is Mia Locks. I'm a senior curator at MoCA, and I have the great privilege of introducing today's panelists, who are all incredible and inspiring Los Angeles-based artists, part of In Plain Sight, which is a public art initiative that recently occupied the skies all over the country on July 4th weekend, which I hope some of you saw. It was pretty amazing. Today's event is made possible by MoCA membership, so a really big thank you to our members for your support. Just a reminder that MoCA memberships actually start at $30 for people under 30 years old. So if you're interested in seeing more programs like this, I hope you'll become a MoCA member. So first off, today we'll be hearing and seeing a kind of overview of In Plain Sight presented by lead artists Rafa, Esparza, and Cassils, followed by a conversation with four more artists. Bamby Salcedo, Beatriz Cortez, Yosimar Reyes, and Ken Gonzalez-Day, whose skywritings formed part of the orbit around Los Angeles, which they're going to tell you a little more about in a minute. In Plain Sight is truly one of the most ambitious and impressive works I've seen, combining public art with community organizing, call to action, and really widespread consciousness raising about the really callous, shameful, and inhumane ways that we treat immigrants in this country. I think there's something simple but really profound about highlighting injustice and lack of freedom on so-called Independence Day. And I'm very honored to introduce the two artists who initiated this project and have taught me so much. So first, Rafa Esparza's work often takes the form of physically exhaustive performances and installations constructed out of Adobe bricks. Esparza also frequently works with collaborators, including members of his family. Esparza has exhibited in several public parks, nightclubs, sidewalks, galleries, and museums in Los Angeles and internationally. Cassils is a transgender artist who makes their own body the material and protagonist of their performances. Cassils' art contemplates the histories of LGBTQI+ violence, representation, struggle, and survival. For Cassils, performance is a form of social sculpture, drawing from the idea that bodies are formed in relation to forces of power and social expectations. Cassils' work investigates historical contexts to examine the present moment. As a trans person navigating the US immigration system, they have glimpsed firsthand the unjust, meritless, financially motivated, bigoted, and dehumanizing nature of the US immigration system. So with that, welcome, Rafa, Cassils, everybody. I'll hand it off to you, and thank you to everyone for being here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending the first of a three-part virtual series on In Plain Sight. We'd like to thank our curatorial team, led by Director of Cultural Programming and Partnership, Kyle Stephen, and Curator Paulina Lara, for organizing tonight's event. We'd also like to thank Mia Locks, Brian Dang, Asa Hirsch, Sarah Lloyd Stifler, Brian Barsena, and Eva Seta, and the MoCA members. A special thank you, very special thank you to Samuel Vasquez, who has stood behind this project from the very beginning. Welcome.
Peggy Phelan writes in her essay, Violence and Rupture, Misfires of the Ephemeral, which was published in the book Live Art in LA, Performance in Southern California from 1970s to the 80s, that, quote, LA is forever cast as the golden child. Golden because of the sunset over the Pacific. Golden because of the gold rush, gold because of the fortunes at play in Hollywood. Golden because of the long way the clear lights lends halos to the hill. The golden aspect of the mythic claim is also perpetuated by the dulcet notes of the Beach Boys, California's endless skyways and ribbons of highway. Like all myths, California as a golden child illuminates and obscures some crucial facts. Among them, the hidden and mystical version of California that has violent truths.
Los Angeles' golden hue now hisses and rises from the blaze of uprisings, as hundreds of thousands of Americans are protesting the policing of daily life, especially among Black communities and communities of color. Immigration policy is moving in a notably dangerous direction. The system criminalizes, incarcerates, and deports people, separating families and loved ones forever and depriving them of their liberty. Fairness, freedom, opportunity, and respect for human rights should be at the core of our immigration system. But our golden state isn't up to uphold these values. Racism is at the root of many of our systems in the US, designed to strip people of their dignity. The US immigration system racially profiles and targets people based on the color of their skin.
To quote one of our skywriting artists, Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, she says that, quote, "One cannot say abolish ICE without also saying defund the police." In the lead up to the launch, we created this video edited by Graham Colbans with music by Dorian Wood to promote the skytyping performance, educate people about ICE detention, and build anticipation.
A storm of change. And that storm.
ICE detention is the practice of incarcerating people who are immigrants. From those who have just arrived to those who've lived in the US for years while they await the determination of their immigration status or their potential deportation. Detention is an integral part of the machinery of deportation, and the federal government wastes more than $25 billion of your tax dollars every year on immigration and customs enforcement and on customs and border protection to profile, detain, and deport immigrants. Here are the relevant facts. In 2019, ICE detained on average over 50,000 people each day. As of January 2020, 81% of people detained in ICE custody nationwide are held in facilities that are owned or managed by private prisons. This is a record high.
It is against this backdrop that we came together to form In Plain Sight, a coalition of 80 artists co-funded by Cassils and I, and united to create an innovative poetic artwork dedicated to the abolition of immigrant detention in the US and the culture of incarceration. A highly orchestrated mediagenic spectacle and poetic action, this project is conceived in 5 parts. A poetic elegy enacted on a national scale, an interactive website, an anthology docuseries, accessible actions for the public to take to join the movement against immigrant detention, and cultural partnerships producing arts-related education and engagement. And so the performance. Recently, over Independence Day weekend, IPS launched the nation's skytyping fleets with a carbon offset plan to spell out artist-generated messages in water vapor, legible for miles. These messages were typed in the sky over detention facilities, immigration courts, borders, and other sites of historic relevance. As a plain sword, they made visible in the sky what is too often unseen and unspoken on the ground: the appalling, profoundly immoral imprisonment of immigrants. In Plain Sight broke through this wall of secrecy, using art as public engagement to expose and scrutinize the sites of detention centers. And so just to give you a sense of impact, a single skywritten message over an urban center on a clear day can reach up to 3 million people. With 80 messages in the sky, we brought this issue to 24 million people nationwide. And with the help of our robust impact and PR team, headed by Matisse Bustos Hawks, public engagement includes a growing presence of 20,000 Instagram followers, over 150 pieces of press, over 100,000 shares on social media, and over 3.54 billion in readership from our recent action.
The artists who participated in IPS depict a vast array of ages, reflected established and emerging voices, artists who have been detained, undocumented artists, indigenous artists, artists descended from those who survived Japanese American incarceration, the Holocaust, and the afterlife of the AIDS crisis. In an act of solidarity, these artists are coming together to focus their attention on immigrant detention.
So this coming fall, we will fly again over the southeastern United States, reigniting this important national discussion before the election. Contrary to the common belief that most detention facilities are solely housed in border states, Phase 2 of In Plain Sight aims to highlight the little known fact that southeastern US historically has the most incarcerated people per capita, and also has some of the largest and most horrific detention centers in the country. And so impact. Our art activation is distinguished by working with an engaged social impact team who specialize in community partner engagement. Lina Srivastava, Rebecca Lichtenfeld, and Se Hernandez Ronquillo have formed this work alongside us as IPS, as well as IPS producer Christy Mitchell. We built the project predicated on 3 commitments. First, to amplify the voices of immigrants. Second, to be intersectional in the makeup of the production team and the invited contributors. Third, to partner with a network of national and local activists and organizations working directly with affected communities and provide a new way for them to collaborate with each other, highlighting their calls to action, help attract attention and resources for their work. In Plain Sight is invested in strategy and infrastructure, and we are in this for the long haul. In addition to developing a cultural partnership program, educational efforts, we will release an 8-part episodic docuseries directed by award-winning social justice documentarian PJ Raval and producer Farid Hassaman. There will also be an art exhibition, jointly curated by IPS Director of Cultural Programming, Kyle Steven, and the Director of Oxy Arts, Melia Yesayan. Oxy Arts will feature an IPS exhibition opening September 3rd of this year. Occidental College's pedagogical theme for the fall semester is migration. And so in addition to the exhibition, Oxy has integrated In Plain Sight into 15 of their course curriculums across 5 schools, as well as Syracuse University has dedicated its entire visiting program to IPS this coming semester. The augmented reality app, The Fourth Wall, is a free augmented reality public art platform exploring resistance and inclusive creative expression. Created by Nancy Baker Cahill in collaboration with IPS, the app challenges traditional experiences of public art and monuments. We have placed digital mock-ups of the sky typefaces at 20 of the detention centers on our flight path. In phase 2 of IPS, we will expand the visibility by grafting all 200 detention centers in the US into our augmented reality app. Long after the vapor trails have passed, the faces will still be visible in the sky, vis-a-vis your phone. Finally, we're working towards a culminating event in 2021. Here we will host the IPS Summit, a national gathering of our cultural, educational, and organizational partners for a weekend of art, action, and dialogue.
In a time of lockdown and quarantine, in time of fascism and propaganda, we need reason and action to be supported by grand visions of change. Both sides have this, but our vision is centered on love and community and relevant action, not in fear and division. We simply do it better. Unleash us, our movements for Black lives, for climate, for the displaced, for the detained. We are looking to hold the public square and we are facing backlash. This moment is calling on our side, that is, all of us who are pushing against the GOP acquittance and fighting for a reimagined country, to continue to use art, diverse voices, and infrastructure of community building infused with justice and of political theater. We need support. Allow people to stand up in a different way, create space and do so. Drive resources towards using public dialogue to reignite compassion and build collective vision for the country. And our activations leading up to November can only apply a different kind of pressure and allow us to dream beyond the election. We have 4 months left, so let's go big.
And so the Los Angeles orbit. What is an orbit path? When we were working with skytypers and we discussed the indexical nature of In Plain Sight, we have to consider how clustered some of the flyover sites are within a city like Los Angeles. We decided that some of these flyovers could be executed as orbit paths, which is a skytyping route where the fleet of planes flew in a 20-mile diameter orbit around Los Angeles. So the artists that brought their messages to this monumental performance reflect the diversity and subjectivities in terms of gender identity, race, class, immigration status, age, and a committed practice to a matrix of issues addressed through In Plain Sight. The following 5 folks are the writers that make up the Los Angeles orbit.
Very proud to have Bamby Salcedo as part of our team. Bamby's remarkable and wide-ranging activist work has brought voice and visibility not only to the trans community, but also to multiplying overlapping communities and issues that our life has touched, including immigration, HIV, LGBTQI, youth, incarceration, and Latinx communities. Bamby's work as a collaborator and as a connector through a variety of organizations reflect her skills in crossing various borders and boundaries. Some of you might remember this image. In 2018, Game 5 of the World Series at
In 2018 of the World Series at Dodger Stadium, Bamby Salcedo, her co-conspirators and members of the Trans Latina Coalition dropped an enormous banner in protest of 45, attempting to strip transgender people of their official recognition. Regarding the inspirational action, Bamby stated, "I hope that this action will motivate members of the trans community, our allies, our comrades, to really activate and to really understand that we have power. We can demonstrate our power everywhere." She is the president and CEO of the Trans Latina Coalition that is currently working overtime to advocate to help service the Los Angeles trans community and in the wake of COVID-19. Bamby Salcedo was paired with Los Angeles ICE field office in downtown Los Angeles, and her skytype message, as you saw it, read, "Stop crimmigration now." Cassils, sometimes your audio comes off, so we can't hear you at all. I just reread it.
I'm getting like a relaunch Zoom situation and restart my computer. Should I come back?
No, you're good right now. Maybe I could go through it if you go through the slides.
Sounds good.
Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Beatriz Cortez is another one of our skytypers. Beatriz Cortez is a great friend and collaborator. She's a multidisciplinary artist based here in Los Angeles. Her work explores simultaneity, life in different temporalities, and versions of modernity, memory, and loss in the aftermath of war, and the experience of migration, and in relation to imagining possible futures. Beatriz's sculpture, Solquin, was installed in 2 parts located at the Hammer and the Bowtie Project with Clock Shop. Inspired by the ancient Maya 260-day calendar for agriculture, the gears in the sculpture follow hypocycloid motion, marking time through movement that is at once circular and linear. The location symbolizes different realities. Installed in their disparate locations and facing each other 20 miles apart, the sculptures reference a bond that binds the 2 entities of the same kind across time and space. In addition to contributing a phrase to be skytyped, Beatriz helped organize a coalition of Central American immigrant justice organizations in Los Angeles to collaborate on drawing a large-scale mural on the ground viewable from the sky that read, "Defund ICE." Beatriz was paired with an immigration court in downtown LA, and her message read, "No cages, no jaulas."
Ken Gonzalez-Day, can you hear me?
Go for it, yeah.
All right, if you can't just do that. And
All right.
Ken is a Los Angeles-based artist whose interdisciplinary practice considers the historical construction of race and the limits of representational systems ranging from lynching photographs to museum displays. His widely exhibited Erased Lynching series from 2006, along with the publication of Lynchings in the West, 1850 to 1935, which is also made in 2006, transformed. Works from the profiled series consider many of these contested objects. Working? Yeah. The material legacy of slavery, colonialism, imperialism, whiteness, and their place in museum collections today. Ken was paired with the Los Angeles Immigration Court, and his message read, "Abolition now."
Yosimar Reyes. Yosimar is a nationally acclaimed poet and public speaker, born in Guerrero, Mexico, and raised in Eastside San Jose. Reyes explores the themes of migration and sexuality in his work. His first collection of poetry, For Colored Boys Who Speak Softly, was self-published after a collaboration with the legendary musician Carlos Santana. His work has also been published in various online journals and books, including Mariposas, an anthology of queer modern Latino poetry, Queer en Aztlán, Chicano Male Recollections of Consciousness and Coming Out. Yosimar was paired with the Los Angeles Metropolitan Jail, and his message flying over Los Angeles was Chinga tu miga. Well, one of my favorites. Patrice Cullers. Although Patrice cannot be with us today, but In Plain Sight could not have been complete without her. She came on as an invited artist, but also an advisor to In Plain Sight early on in its inception. And truly the Los Angeles orbit would be incomplete without her phrase. Though most of us know Patrice through her abolitionist organizing and activist work, Patrice maintains a strong engagement with her art practice as well. Using theater techniques, performance, audio, and movement, her work renders bare the narratives of state-induced trauma while lifting up a path towards healing. Training in theater of the oppressed and dance, Patrice has worked as an artist in residence, dancer, choreographer, designer, stylist, producer, and director in various productions since 2005. Patrice is also the co-founder of the Crenshaw Dairy Mart, a space dedicated to shifting the trauma-induced conditions of poverty and economic injustice, bridging cultural work and advocacy, and investigating ancestries through the lens of Inglewood and its community. Patrice was paired with the Los Angeles County Jail, which is the largest county jail in the country, and her message was care, not cages. Thank you all very much for being here today. It's our honor to get to speak with you about your work, your practice, and your participation within Plain Sight.
So now we're going to go some questions for the panelists. Rafa, you want to start?
Sure. And so we got to see everyone's phrases, and some of you are sharing them behind your screens. We wanted to ask you, because you know, there's a character limit to the phrases that could be sky typed in the sky, and so while they, you know, they're phrases that are seemingly like simple or simplified in their delivery. There's obviously a lot of thinking, a lot of brainstorming around how to create such an impactful message. So we wanted to ask everyone, maybe starting with Beatriz, if you could talk to us about why you chose your phrase and what its broader social, political, or personal relevance the phrase might have. And in your response, if you could also share your thoughts about how the project changed or deepened since it was proposed to you early on this year, which was before the pandemic and before the uprisings.
Thank you for this invitation, but more importantly, I want to thank Rafa and Cassils for this experience, which not only gave us so many gifts, but opened up so much in my own imaginary as an artist, and opened up spaces for me to work with the communities that I have been working with for years, but working with them all together at once. That was something unique and beautiful. I did struggle quite a bit because I talk a lot and I thought it's which is something so traumatic, so personal, so important to my practice, to my life. But if I had to choose, I wanted to speak about the dehumanizing conditions of the people who are detained, and I wanted to speak of the children who have been in cages, because they are the future of our communities. And so I also wanted to bilingualism or some sort of multiculturalism, and I was really happy to have the opportunity to do that, because besides the phrase that I chose, which was no cages, no jaulas, and that was already bilingual, with the communities, the Central American community organizers, we chose the phrase defund eyes on the ground, and they decided to write in Maya Quiche the phrase "We will not be afraid" over in a virtual format over the MacArthur Park, and also in real life over Texas. And that was really important because it provided really a more comprehensive understanding of the Central American multiculturalism, that is really not about being Latino, but there are Central American Black communities and Central American Indigenous communities and Central American Latino communities. And I think that not erasing that was really important to all of us in our discussions. And so not only having that discussion with myself, but with all these people who are part of the community organizations that I was working with was a beautiful experience. But I think about the pandemic. Well, about the pandemic, that definitely, I think that from all the organizations and all the people who individually and collectively went to the streets to speak out and to march for Black Lives Matter. And for all of us, the Central American community organizers, it was important to write our messages in ways that would contribute to that struggle and add to that struggle rather than compete with that struggle. And so that was a really important conversation that we all had. How to participate in plain sight in a way that would bring more to that collective commitment rather than pose the Latino community and the black and brown as two different sides. And, you know, for me, this is really important because I don't believe in that kind of defined identity. For me, it was really important to blur those identities, problematize the idea of being Latino and how it erases indigenous peoples, etc. And so it was a really important moment to think about that. And what does it mean to breathe together? What does it mean to have the right to breathe and breath as a way to be part of the atmosphere, and then to see the letters in the sky being clouds and being part of the atmosphere? All of that came together, and I think it became really, it multiplied in so many ways, and I still am trying to digest all that.
Thank you, Beatriz. It was so beautiful. I mean, I think something that we talked about a lot amongst the team also was the fact that that the skytyping is done by one company, and who has access to this format. And so being able to look up at the sky and see a word typed in Spanish or typed in any of the indigenous languages or other languages that were written in the sky was incredibly impactful. I think it, you know, since skytyping has existed, millions of folks have been really not being able to access these messages that are written in the sky. So thank you for sharing your intentions behind.
They're never about us.
Exactly. Ken, could we hear your thoughts about your phrase?
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for being here. The number of characters was less than 15 that we had to choose from, so it was nearly impossible. In fact, it was impossible. And we met together as a group at the Four Freedoms Conference in downtown Los Angeles, and that was really the first time I had met many of the participants, and there were, you know, literally hundreds of people there that connected with all the different events going on. So it was an attempt to bring voice to social justice issues at a larger scale, and we were just one part of that conversation. So one of the things that was great about it was having all of us there and trying to think about how our messages would exist or coexist in the same sky, right? And how authorship might function differently in this particular context. So what I was really interested in was the way that our voices would blend, the way that that where one begins and the other sort of ends is going to be very hard for a viewer to know. And so for me, I had to bring it down to Angela Davis and the question of prison abolition, because that text was so essential to my own education. And it's a text that I teach every semester with my students. And it really helps them to think about to reframe the questions of social justice, to reframe the questions of racial justice, to think about the dynamics of institutions, and as an educator, to be within an institution and to try to reframe that. So from my perspective, I felt if I could just add, really the footnote, the reference point to all of the other comments being made, that would be a contribution that I would be happy to do. So that was how I got to the phrase. And then within that, of course, abolition is a much larger concept that could obviously begins in the abolition of slavery, the abolition of inequalities of all kinds, and of course the abolition of ICE specifically in this time and in this moment, but the abolition of prisons, the abolition of police. And so this larger question of stopping something, of ending something, of reframing an institution that is very much a part of an American history was something that I think we could all bring something different to it. So I was trying to get something that would really speak to as many different causes as possible. And of course, after the protests and the emergence of the pandemic, that became even clearer, that we needed to, a number of institutions need to be rethought and reconsidered. And even the notion of public space, of the sky, of who's allowed to speak, of what voices resonate and what language is spoken are all sort of tied to that. So the question of really, I guess, asserting this idea of an end also gives us the promise of a future. And so I think that was really where my heart was at the time. Thank you.
I love that. That's beautiful. Bamby, what do you have to say about your phrase and maybe how things changed for you with the uprisings in COVID?
Bueno, primero que nada, a mí me gusta siempre darle gracias a mi poder superior por darme la oportunidad de estar aquí con ustedes, y también quiero honrar a la gente que nos acompaña hoy en día. I know that some of you were not able to understand what I just say, but it is always a customary thing that I do, that before I start speaking in any format, that I honor my creator for giving me the opportunity to be here, but also I want to also honor the presence of all the people who is here with us. Obviously you could have been doing anything else, but you chose to be with us, and I appreciate that so much. I also, want to obviously acknowledge and appreciate the leadership of Cassils and Rafa and everybody really who not just contributed, but also helped organize and helped shape the dream and the vision that for ultimately become a reality. The message that I chose was stop crime migration. And the reason was because I think within the broader society and even within our own communities, what oftentimes happens is that people don't necessarily see that the criminal justice system or the criminal justice system, right, and the immigration system are set up in the same way, right? They're really set up to make money off people, right? And they are truly two powerful industries that that really have been generated because uh, the taxes that people pay, but also when they detain and incarcerate people, they also generate money. And so um, it's important that people understand that, right? And I could probably see that this particular message could have been confusing for people, but I think that was the whole purpose, right, of the skytyping, right? That people would actually create some type of consciousness, right, and that would ask questions, right, to their friends, their family, their colleagues, whomever may have a type of understanding that the criminal system really works exactly the same as the immigration system, and particularly the detention portion of it. Um, and so, you know, I also want to obviously say that as a trans Latina mujer inmigrante indocumentada, and to be part of this amazing and historic event, um, it's truly an honor, right? And it really speaks about not just the leadership of the organizers, but also about the inclusion, right, of the diverse communities that are doing this work. And I'm just so honored and privileged that I had the opportunity to work with beautiful and amazing people who I not just admire, but I also have much respect for. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
No, al contrario, thank you for joining us and carrying these conversations through with us up until that weekend. We were all like going crazy trying to make it happen.
I it was so hot. Yeah.
I think early on when we were discussing like what it meant to be a project that was going to stand behind the statement like abolish ICE, we understood then that it meant that we also had to say like that we need to be saying defund the police, right? And so what does it mean to look at these two statements and who's saying them, and how do we stand, how do our different communities stand in relationship to this violence and this power? And so thank you for being present and in plain sight and shaping it and lending your voice to the project.
Thank you.
I wanted to also, I see that Yosi arrived. Thank you for jumping on, Yosimar. Wanted to ask you the same question. If you could speak to your phrase, chinga tu migra, a phrase that I learned a lot of people just love to say, not only while they saw it, but like I think just like seeing it repeated over and over on social media. Could you talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the phrase, and also if you could talk about your relationship to the project before the pandemic hit and before the uprisings happened, if your relationship to the project changed?
Yeah. Well, initially when I was coming up with the phrase, I'm a poet. I'm a poet writer that happens to be undocumented. And so initially when I was conceptualizing something to come up, I knew that I wanted to have a cultural significance in the communities that I wanted to address in the audience. So for me, one of the significance was like, for me, was important. It's like, I wanted to be in Spanish. I wanted to be in Spanish because I was thinking of like the people that are driving to work or the people that might look up to the sky. I wanted to have some sort of significance, right? So that's why I was out here jotting like Tigres del Norte lyrics or like lyrics that people are gonna really relate to. And I think for me, the other thing that I think that was el lenguaje was very important to me. And then the other thing that I started conceptualizing is that I came across this phrase because I think it's a popular phrase that a lot of folks use, but they usually use chinga la migra, right? But I think with this, we really want to be specific, right? And if you translate it to English, it basically means like, fuck your immigration, fuck ICE, whatever. And I think for me, what was very important too was also that as undocumented immigrants, one of the things that we get taught a lot in this country is to always be grateful, right? And though we are very much grateful for the opportunities that are allocated to us, I think that comes to a point that we also need to be able to welcome dissent from undocumented individuals, because the way that we are subjugated to different abuses is not something that we need to be conditioned to be grateful for. And I think for me, that also part of the respectability politics of what is a good immigrant. What if I were to say this out in the sky, what kind of repercussions would it have? So I think for me, that I think that's what I was toying with, of like allowing folks to just say, like, you know, like, bro, we're tired, right? And I think that's the kind of energy that I wanted to have, kind of. And it's not about like kind of, you know, well, it is. Well, I think for me, it's more about like allowing ourselves to feel anger and recognizing, acknowledging that our anger is justified. I think that was very important to me. And also, I think for me was pre-pandemic, right? My role was definitely thinking about all the undocumented immigrants that exist and run in LA, that make LA run. And now I think that, you know, that we're seeing a lot of this data coming out of COVID, and we're seeing that a lot of, I'm right now, I decided to come back to San Jose to be with my family, and I happened to arrive at the same neighborhood that I grew up in, which happens to be predominantly undocumented immigrants. But now we are realizing that the zip codes in my city that have been deeply impacted have actually been zip codes that are inhabited by undocumented immigrants. So what does this mean for our communities who are essential workers, right? They might not be working as nurses in hospitals, and some might be working as nurses in hospitals, but they're also working in janitorial services. They're the clerks at the supermarket. They're the ones delivering foods on Uber Eats, all these kind of things, right? They are the essential workers. So what does that mean when, one, they are choosing exposure versus, you know, choosing work over safety, right? And because they don't have the luxury of that. And then you have a government that only aids $500 for any undocumented household. It's not enough, right? So I think for me, that's what the whole phrase signifies, how it sometimes it just feels that the disparities are very severe. And I think, if anything, what's more important to me is the dignity, the pride, and the strength of undocumented communities. And that's what I wanted to capture in this phrase. So yeah.
And it's also, it's like, it's angry, but it's also funny. You know, it has this double edge. I think you were one of the few artists that really played with sensibility like that. And also, like, you know, we had to clear our phrases by our pilots they're very like, we are not political, you know, but they're like, chinga tu negro. You know, they kind of read over that, wasn't quite sure about it, found out what it meant after, and called us up, you know, like, what does it mean? You have to translate it. And I was like, Rafa, we gotta. So we were like, to heck with, you know, we had to do this like really pablum-y distillation, because, you know, that was another crazy part about this project. It was like trying to, you know, get these phrases in the sky, working with folks that, you know, really don't understand the lived experiences of the artists we're working with. So that was fascinating, that kind of inversion of power. So thank you for sharing that. I also loved your phrase. I'm frozen. Can you guys see me or hear me?
Yeah. You're good.
Cool. Great. So I think we want to ask, we don't have so much more time. Rafa, out of the 2 questions we have left, should we go with the second or the third?
I'd like to hear about the second question.
Okay.
Really cool.
So the second question we had was like, Los Angeles is a cultural and activist ecosystem, and it's the origin point for this project. So I'm wondering what you're all thinking about in relationship to proposals of care in our communities, and perhaps the notion of care, which is a bit different when you're trans and queer, as I think all of us are here, and how that has a kind of strategy and value. So how do you engage, how do you see your practice engage with this idea of care in this current moment? So maybe, who wants to go? Go for it. Bamby, please.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna speak for, on the trans experience, right? And I didn't really mention anything about COVID and how our community, um, has been impacted, right? But I guess, you know, short, just to answer in a short version of your question, Cassils, is that, the Trans Latino Coalition, it's a national advocacy organization that started in 2009 with this idea of, if we're able to change the structures that marginalize us, right? Specifically thinking about trans Latina immigrant women at that time. And as we were organizing across the United States and the 10 states and cities where we have representation, what we saw time and time again is that our community were not having access to the basic needs, right? And services that we deserve. And so in 2015, our national group decided that in order for us to address that issue, that we needed to also do service provision. And as a result, we are currently the only trans-led organization in Los Angeles that is doing this work at this level, right? We got our first grant in January 2016, right? So again, we started as a grassroots effort, but then we also realized that we needed to have access to money, right? And so we transitioned into getting into the nonprofit industrial complex, right? For us to have access to money. And so, because we understand that that we need to build a healthy trans community, right? And we can only do that by providing, first and foremost, people with the basic things that people need, right? Like food and a place to stay, and just those basic things that many of us take for granted, right? And so, and we have been able to, since January 2016, in just a little over 4 years, we have been able to build an organization that right now employs 14 trans people here in Los Angeles. We have a multiplicity of services, including a reentry program. We give food every day. And like, we have an anti-violence project, we have legal services, we have built a multi-purpose, multi-service space. And then COVID-19 hits, right? So like, we were going into like, oh yeah, we're doing great. And it's, it has obviously shaken us to the core as an organization. However, we have been able to also respond to the need of our community, right? Because all the work that we do is informed by our community. And so we know that trans people specifically, and I think it's important that we understand where trans people were before COVID-19, where we were situated in 2020, and how we, because of this global pandemic, how we're going to be set even further behind than how we were prior to the pandemic. Our center hasn't closed through the pandemic, because we understand that even if it's food that we need to provide to our people, then that's what we'll do. And we're also right now, supporting people to the best of our ability, right? Yosimar shared about the $500 that the government gave, undocumented people in California, right? But many trans undocumented individuals weren't able to have access to that because of the requirements, right? And so my responsibility and my job as the CEO of this organization is to really ensure that I find ways to support not just the people who's working with us, but also our community. And we're very grateful that a couple of different organizations have stepped up to give us money to redistribute to our community. And we anticipate that by the end of this year, we will probably distribute about $250,000 back to our community to support them with rental assistance and food and things like that. So for us to take care of ourselves, or to take care of our own people, we have to obviously not just be innovative, but also find ways for us to continue to support those who are the most marginalized within our community.
Thank you so much for that work, Bamby. And for all of you who are watching this webinar, we're going to be sharing some assets through MOCA's website and also on In Plain Sight, which will let you know how you can support the Trans Latina Coalition in this moment, because we all need to support each other. And Bamby, we appreciate the work that you do so much. Thank you for that work. And thank you for being part of this project. Ken, Beatriz, Yossi, would you like to weigh in on this question of?
I would be happy to.
Please.
I think for me it's very complicated to talk about care, because I grew up in the time of war, and in a moment when all of us, even as I was growing up, we're discussing theology of liberation and collective organizing. And I migrated to the United States when I was 18. And that was a very difficult and traumatic moment for me. And so, to me, there are things that speak of care. For example, labor. There's some of our labor that is taken by capitalism, and that we put in, to survive. And at the same time, every part of it, everything that we do is part of a system of care. Our labor can multiply our will and our care for others. And so I think that, I don't have this idea of self-care. I'm going to go to the Caribbean and rest in the ocean for 5 days. For me, care is about labor. It's about furthering the messages that we want to further. And so this idea of care is, to me, it's about labor. How do we organize more? How do we further this message? How do I make a sculpture? How do I embed the labor of immigrants into a sculpture that can speak of that to others without me being there? How do I further the messages, or contribute to further the messages that members of my community have been putting out there for 40 years? Because for the last 40 years, Central American peoples have been escaping the wars in Central America and have been organizing here. And so I think that working with all these community organizations together was a really beautiful experience, and how each of them provides different services and forms of care to our community. And the labor that they do provides health services through Clínica Romero. Maya Visión provides translation services to indigenous peoples who are facing court system or need translation in the hospital. There's SALEF, which centers more around educational opportunities to youth. There's Carpi, which is inside season where I work, which is also furthering at another level, at the higher educational level, opportunities for students, but also looking at research in our communities. There's CARES, and that provides legal services and is concentrating also a campaign for tepecianos, and tepecianos are also the parents of the children in detention centers. They're the parents of the DACA youth, and so, you know, as we celebrate that DACA is protected, even though the government is ignoring that protection, we're also thinking of the parents that are unprotected, the parents of those young people who are not able to live in peace because they have to worry that their parents can be deported at any moment. And so all these things are still there, and our collective labor provides us forms of protection, provides us opportunities, and provides us visibility. And so even as I make my art, or even as I organize with them, and as I work as an educator, all those things are part of the labor that makes me feel that I'm contributing a little bit to that system of care. And so I am enjoying every bit of it, and taking ownership of my labor, the one that capitalism didn't pay me for, the one that capitalism didn't take away from me. That's my form of care.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Beatriz, for speaking to care and the sort of like framing around how we've been encouraged to practice care. I was wondering if Ken, you had some thoughts. I wanted to chime in on that question.
Sure. I think one of the things that's really been impacting my life is the pandemic. So I'm a professor. I teach for a living, and you know, we were basically in the middle of March. All the students were sent home. We were all sent off, and all summer I've been working with the students and with faculty, trying to figure out how to keep everybody employed, from the kitchen workers to the gardeners to the faculty to the adjunct faculty to the part-time faculty to the staff who are there, and all of this in a campus that's been locked down. And our students have gone home, and some of them are in their closets, literally trying to do schoolwork, or trying to get access to the internet, or trying to just work off their phones. And so one of the challenges that is facing the younger generation right now is just getting access to the internet, just getting the technology they need to be able to do the coursework. And we have generations of kids that are not being prepared to go to college, or not going to college, or not going to junior college because they can't get in or they can't do the work. And so it's of course it's impacting the immediate students, but it's also impacting much larger circles of students and parents who can't go to work. I mean, we have faculty who have to stay home and take care of the kids because there's no school to send them to. So it's not just the college students and the professors. It's really a whole swaths of the society and of the community. And in that, we're trying to figure out, what is the value of art, really? I mean, what are we doing here? What are the kinds of care that a creative life can give us back or give to others? Can art be a bridge between people that are really isolated and trapped from one another? My students are not able to even see each other. So all of those things we take for granted, of having a best friend, of making a best friend, are things that are much harder to do in Zoom, as you can imagine. And so, the kinds of crisis that I'm dealing with is really just the very deep emotional challenges that my students are facing. That's the most immediate, and just trying to get them through this, and keeping our fingers crossed that we are able to find a way forward, I guess, as we think about future generations.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, I know we're going over a little bit, but I want to give Yosi a chance to maybe speak to that question before we go into the chat and take some questions from the folks that logged on. Yosi?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to talk about for me was, in general, is like, I felt like so overwhelmed by everything that was happening, because as this pandemic hit, I'm also facing my own personal challenges with my family. I have an 85-year-old grandmother that, you know, needs a lot, who is very high risk, and she's very active. So trying to convince an old Mexican lady to stay home and not be selling Mary Kay products is very difficult. So on top of having that challenge, I had to move back home. And in me moving back home is realizing that, just like my grandma, there's a lot of moms out here that are, you know, are non-traditional workers, meaning they go door to door selling items. Their income is based on being entrepreneurs or creating jobs for themselves. But based now that there's no social interaction, like now they're like, listen, rent is super high. I live in San Jose, California, which is one of the highest cities, and the rent is the highest in the country. And so now for me is realizing that a lot of these women do not have access to kind of resources because nobody is teaching them. On top of that, there's this assumption that we can just go online and do applications, and people are not talking about the digital divide with the undocumented women. These women do not have bank accounts. They don't have email addresses. They have all these kind of systems that just don't work for them, right? So me being me, I'm like, okay, let me figure it out. So I ended up like building like 20 email accounts with the same password, just so I could keep track of that. But like, I think for me was more, what was like, how do I step in as one person and try to make an impact as minimal or whatever impact I can have. And thankfully, being able to be an artist and use my work and my voice, I ended up developing a poem and a piece and showcasing it through my platform, that we were able to team up with a nonprofit organization that did not require all these loopholes or these hurdles for them to get direct access. And next to that, I think in 2 days, I was able to raise $7,000, teamed up with a nonprofit organization who matched that donation. And we're actually able to impact 21 undocumented senoras who got their little cute check, and we're super excited, right? And I think for me, it was more about like the impact of just being able to duplicate my resources and also know my own capacity. And that looks like a lot, right? And I was like, listen, I was trying to help 10, but it multiplied, so I ended up helping 21. But I think for me, like, if anything, for me was like, that is the power that one person can use. And I think if as much as you feel daunted by all this happening, I think for me was more important of like figuring out how can I also use my art form and what I do and what I write, and also help kind of alleviate some sort of these burdens. And you'd be surprised, you know, we gave them like $500, some $1,000. That goes a long way for a lot of these families. It's amazing to see what an undocumented family can do with $500, okay? So I think if anything, care for me means that as a poet and as a writer, I also understand that my work is rooted in the lives of the people that uplifted me. And I care and I choose to put myself in these situations because I know exactly what it was like to want something and not have it. And me how using my talents or my translation services, I can be that bridge. So yeah. And I'm gonna go to heaven. I know I'm gonna go to heaven.
Thank you so much, Yosi. Thank you. I mean, thank you everyone, to be honest. I feel like it's like these examples of how people have been showing up through the pandemic and through the uprising to like uplift and support. I mean, everyone, like, you know, I think while being like introduced as artists, activists, and organizers, but as you can see, we're all doing like so much work as educators, as community members, as people that are like organizers, people that are like literally like our practices are like source of income for the team that's like helping us like build our work. So thank you so much for presencing your experiences and your stories. I wanted to, Cassils, did you want to add anything before you hand it over to Mia?
No, I think the only thing I would maybe add too is just that whole aspect of care was something that was very present in this project. Just like the amount of people that came together. We didn't have support from like, you know, some big entity. You know, we basically scrappily with gritted teeth made this crazy thing happened, but it wasn't just us alone. It was so many people that came together and just hauled ass and pushed to make this project manifest. And there's something incredibly emboldening and inspiring about that. You know, it's as, you know, Ken was saying, it's like when there is an end, what's possible on these new horizons. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts with us today, and we'll hand it over to Mia and take some questions from the chat box.
So we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions, but I'll just pull up a few. I actually like this sort of simple one, which is just how did you even come up with the idea of skywriting, you know, as a way to do an artistic project? How did you even, you talked a little about this idea of it being, you know, sort of not the most immediately accessible, but how, like, where did that even come for you guys?
I mean, I think it came from, you know, as artists, especially as performance artists, we're often working with these incredibly limited budgets and means. And I had a job where I was working on a commercial set for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, all this money being spent to advertise a shoe, wouldn't it be insane if artists had us to instead speak to larger social issues, or really like use that platform in a really expansive way. And so I think that had been in my mind, but Rafa and I had been in discussion for quite a while, wanting to make work around this issue, but it hadn't quite clicked. But I think like it was 4th of July of last year, and seeing planes go over top and spell out like this patriotic display, this militaristic display, but thinking also about the power of indexicality, knowing that how many of these camps exist, and that they exist in every urban center, in every single state in this country, not just at border states, and really wanting to use the sort of indexical nature of skytyping to point to what's happening on the ground. And as like Rafa was saying in our opening statement, just the sheer visibility, you know, one single phrase, one letter is as high as the Empire State Building, you know, and so the ability to have something that's seen by 3 million people, to put a hashtag on it, be able to drive them towards a website that then allows people to learn about, because we have this interactive website, xmap.us, which tells you where all of the detention centers exist in the United States are. And then also we highlight immigrant bail bond funds, as well as calls to actions, certain things that you could do. So this was like us not wanting to make a work about immigration, but really thinking how, as artists in this moment, can we make a spectacle that elevates the voices of those who've been doing this work for so many years, for so long, and how can we use the power of art to pierce through that sort of electoral politics and the sort of rhetoric that we're constantly drowning in, to connect deeply, and to drive people towards not just knowing, but then doing, giving them the option to do something about it, right? Because once you know something, you can't unknow it anymore. And this is something that we feel is urgent and must be actionable. You know?
Yeah. And I think something that was really important in terms of like how we were talking about this project was also harness it as a resource, harness this platform as a resource that we could share with a cohort of 80 artists, activists, and organizers, but also have it be something that could multiply, right? And just kind of like working within that spirit of generosity, where you could like share space to expand space, right? And so thinking about, again, like just a sort of diverse subjectivities and backgrounds and experiences that makes up our cohort, and how really that enriching the sort of conversation that we could have about immigrant detention, but also mass incarceration, right? And the history of mass incarceration in the US. I think those ideas built, you know, as we began to have conversations with each other, and the folks that ended up becoming, you know, part of our In Plain Sight team, our impact team, our web designers, PJ and Fariha, really like the collaboration was beyond like Cassils and I. It was in constant conversation with with folks that really shaped what this project became and really how it's moving forward. I mean, we're still in the thick of it. There's still like phase 2, as you heard in our presentation. And so there's so much that we've learned from this, and there's still so much to grow. But I just kind of wanted to voice that, you know, that this is something that's so much larger than even like the folks that are on this discussion. It's a project that's really so many folks have contributed to, like, hours and hours of labor.
One of the questions in the chat is about whether this is something that you could see could possibly be an annual thing, sort of reclaiming July 4th. Is that something that you all have thought about? Or are they on to you now and you can't do it?
Well, they were on to us.
Yeah, I heard.
I don't know. I don't know if I see this as to be honest, I'm not sure, you know, maybe. But I think really thinking about July 4th, thinking about, you know, we weren't anticipating the world to be where it's at, you know, when we started this project, you know. And so amidst the uprisings, amidst the pandemic, this project took place. But really, as Rafa was saying, the artists involved in this project can speak to the sordid history of this country, which started in genocide and then introduced slavery, and then for-profit prisons, and now for-profit detention, you know? And so the carceral logic of this system, and really thinking about the 4th of July this last year as what is it that we are celebrating? What is patriotism about when we have this history, which is as American as apple pie, right? And so I think really using that day as a day to meditate on what it truly does mean to celebrate the founding of a nation, something that we were really interested in.
I would rather we just abolish ICE and defund the police and have us not have to do this again.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Well said, well said. Well, in the interest of time, I do want to just, you know, we're kind of nearing the end here, and I want to just say, you know, I appreciate all of the questions I have. This has been, I think, a really thought-provoking conversation. And I just want to ask one final question. How can folks get involved? You know, if people are interested in learning more or supporting or volunteering, I know some things have been added to the chat, but if there's folks that want to get involved, you know, with In Plain Sight or with your grassroots partners, where should they go?
I'm going to share my screen again, and maybe Rafa, you want to talk about a little bit?
You can help by contacting the California Governor, Gavin Newsom, by asking him to stop the transfer of immigrants from prison to ICE. Immigrants and refugees with criminal convictions make up 70% of ICE population. Immigrants and refugees in jails and state facilities after serving their time are transferred over to ICE, where they face the threat of deportation. When they are transferred over to ICE, many do not receive adequate support and resources to fight their cases. Recently, Governor Gavin Newsom intervened and prevented the ICE transfer of Chanthon Bun, who was going to be transferred over to ICE after serving his time in San Quentin State Prison. And so we're asking him, we're demanding for him to intervene and stop the transfer of all people to ICE, starting with Thien Pham and Patty Waller. Thien Pham, a Vietnamese refugee, was found suitable for parole on June 23rd of 2020. And Patricia Waller, a Belizean domestic violence survivor, was sentenced to 20 years and is scheduled to parole on August 31st of 2020. So yes, you know, just respond to this call to action. It's a campaign that the ACLU is moving forward. You could also visit our website, xmap.us, and we have the campaigns that we're continuing to amplify. There are bond funds that we're continuing to fundraise for. If you could maybe, I know there's some links in the chat. We want to make sure that maybe give some some space for Bamby, if you could speak to the fundraising efforts for the Trans-Latina Coalition.
Yeah, as I mentioned, we continue to support our community because unfortunately many of the institutions that are set in place and are providing support are not really thinking of the specific needs of trans and gender nonconforming people, specifically here in Los Angeles. To be completely transparent, we don't have the capacity to support people in other areas, unfortunately. But the work that we do, we're not just supporting people with immediate needs right now as it relates to COVID, but we also support people trans women specifically, who are in immigration detention. We support them with commissary money, or for them to get, stamps, or, whatever they may need. So we do a lot of work with that. So if you're able to, make a donation to our organization, would be super amazing, even if it's just $10. And if it could be a recurrent donor, it's amazing. But also, share with your friends. You can also follow us on social media, translatina-coalition.org, or a Translatina Coalition. And also, obviously, go to our website. So we really appreciate all, anything and everything that you could do. And obviously, every little bit counts. So we appreciate it so much. Thank you, Rafa.
Thank you, Bamby. And we'll be sending out some of these assets tomorrow via MoCA, and also on our own site, on our website, but also on our Instagram. Continuing also on our Instagram presence to have interviews with activists and artists discussing these important issues, as well as lead up to the next campaigns that we're planning on launching. So thank you, Mia. Thank you, all of you beautiful Orbit Path artists, for making time and space, and also to the audience for tuning in. We appreciate it.
Yeah, I also just want to thank you all, Cassils, Rafa, Beatriz, Yosimar, Ken, and Bamby, for joining us. And thank you for just the really incredible work you do. You guys are truly an inspiration. Thank you also to MoCA membership for making this program possible, and to my colleagues, Brian Dang and Brian Barsana, Eva Seta, Asa Hirsch, Sarah Stifler, and Samuel Vasquez for the support and collaboration as well. Just one more note in our last few minutes. Coming up next, we actually have 2 more really fantastic programs organized by In Plain Sight. The next one is on Thursday, August 27th, which is 2 weeks from today. So if you're interested, please, stay tuned to the MoCA's channels, but of course, really stay tuned to In Plain Sight's channels. They're in the chat, but I'll just reiterate once more the website, which is xmap.us, and their Instagram handle, which is @InPlainSightMap, which will have some more information. And I'm grateful to all of you for being here and spending this time with us. I think somebody put in the chat that this whole project is really giving me life, and I couldn't agree more. So thank you to everybody. And thanks for coming, and I hope to see you all or see you all at least on Zoom in a couple of weeks.